Hey, Mike Austin used to say that the golf swing was throwing the head of the club around a circle by using the hands. Now, there's no question that what we do with the hands or the wrists during the golf swing has a tremendous effect on how much distance you're going to get, how much accuracy you're going to get, how much precision you're going to get, and ultimately goes a long way in determining how good of a golfer you are. So right after this, we're going to kind of make this our in-depth guide to what the hands do, all the different permutations that they can do that have been used successfully over the years in golf. And hopefully you'll be able to come back to this over and over and use it as a guide if you ever run into any trouble with your swing and you think that your hands might be doing something wrong. Come back and use this as a reference. Hey, this is Steve with HitItLonger.com. I continue my journey to hit the ball longer and straighter than I ever have before, and I hope to help show you how to. Hey, I know a lot of you out there are simply not hitting the ball as far as you would like to off the tee. But the good news is I've created a distance masterclass for you. You can get it for free. Just check out the description below. I've left a link and you can get some great videos delivered right to your email. And the concepts presented there, I believe, are going to help you get 30 to 50 yards added on to your drive. So again, check out the link in the description below and I'll see you there. All right, so for us to understand exactly what it is we need to do with the hands and the wrists throughout a good golf swing, it's important that we understand some basic fundamentals first. Now, first and foremost, the fundamental we need to understand is the grip. Because any differences in how you grip the club will potentially greatly change how you're going to use your hands to be successful through all your golf shots. So let's take a look what we might call the standard model, kind of a neutral point to start with. I'll describe it as best that I can. The right hand is easy. The right hand just feels like you pick up a pail of water by the fingers, just like that. You'd have the thumb just a little bit to the left of the top line, and you're going to have a crease right here that should point somewhere between your ear and your shoulder. So those are good check marks for the right hand. Now the left hand is much more complex. The left hand, again, we're going to grip this thing at the base of the fingers. But notice it does not run directly across the third pad from the top. So we've got these pads or joints in the fingers. 1, 2, 3. We're definitely going to run it across the base pad, the bottom pad of the first 3 fingers. It's going to run slightly diagonally. Notice it starts to climb a little bit up. By the time it reaches the middle, it's starting to climb up higher in that pad. Okay. Then by the time it reaches the index, we're going to scrunch the index just a little bit, just like this, kind of like triggering a gun, just like that. We're going to curl it up a little bit. So it's going to run across the middle pad and the index finger. Then once you wrap the fingers around, starting to form this thing. And in our standard grip, we're going to be looking for what we might call a 1 o'clock thumb position. Now, keep in mind that 1 o'clock thumb position, which is fairly neutral, involves marrying the thumb to the side of the hand like this, where it divides into a V at the bottom, just like that. Also notice I've got my thumb, so this would be a straight thumb. You see this L-shaped gap, and my thumb is long as it's extended outwards, and that grip would look something like that. Okay, not going to be your best leveraging it. It also encourages you to grip too low down into the palm. So instead you're going to take this thumb and kind of pull it in, kind of suck it into the hand this way, and let it kind of extend like the shape of a banana. That way we can greatly increase the amount of leverage, the leverage position that we can get this thumb into where it's now contacting, we can push with and leverage the club with that thumb pad as we learn the right wrist action to make to create power and accuracy. So the grip on the left hand starts to look like this. Thumb at 1, crease dividing to a V, right? That would be our standard position. Let's look at one more detail about the grip, and that's in where the fingers curl around to. Now, if you notice, a couple things. At the pinky, I've got a vacuum seal. In other words, you couldn't get a toothpick in here. The same thing on the second finger side. The way I've got my fingers wrapped around here forms a beautiful vacuum seal. Just like that. So hard to even get a drop of water in there. The same would be true if you measured my third and fourth fingers. So all fingers are forming a tight seal. Now, this does not feel like what you might think. I'm not squeezing, but I'm simply letting the fingers conform and wrap around the grip with precision, just like that. Now, this will greatly change or modify how the wrist will be able to operate during the golf swing. Without this, it's a very, very important points. You cannot have as much control over the head of the club, and therefore it might force you to have to apply more pressure. If you're holding it incorrectly, you might have to squeeze it harder to maintain the same control, and that will change the dynamics of the whole swing. The last detail, I want you to notice here, when I wrap the fingers around, my fourth finger and my third finger both come down and touch the palm. They're long enough to wrap all the way around. In fact, you notice my pinky can almost reach, and my index finger can almost reach. Now, these are mid-sized grips. However, and a great many students that I have taught, their grips are too big for them to do this. It's very important. But I've seen many students where their fingers are much shorter. Their hands are structured differently. They might have bigger palm, shorter fingers. Their fingers only go around this far. They don't even get close. So I want you to get out a grip, and I want you to measure this and see with your current grip size, where do your fingers fall? If you're not able to touch at least one of the two middle fingers here to your glove, it's likely that your grips are too big for you, and it's going to modify the way that you apply force to the grip and the way that you squeeze the club as well. Just like that. You'd want to investigate possibly getting smaller grips. Could be a great mechanical advantage for you if you cannot touch at least one finger down. So if you're hanging only halfway over, often what will happen is that player will not have good precise control over the head unless, of course, he or she squeezes it harder. And now with more tension in the left wrist, we've really changed the dynamics of the way the downswing is going to work and react. All right, those are the basics of the grip. Let's look at a couple popular permutations. First, we can have a strong grip, and that is not to say we're going to go from our standard model of 1 o'clock and we're going to turn it to 2 o'clock, but not just by separating the thumb. We're going to take the whole grip unit like this. There's my left-hand grip unit, my mold. What I'm going to do to go from 1 o'clock neutral to 2 o'clock strong is simply going to pronate the forearm this way, rotate the forearm. We're going to cover more of those basic actions in the next segment. Now, I put that hand on there, and now I have a strong grip with a thumb closer to 2 o'clock. My right hand correspondingly will go fit more underneath. And the measurement of a strong grip is if the creases in both hands start to get at or even outside your back shoulder like they are here. It is fine to have a strong grip. There's not a lot wrong with this. In fact, you might see a lot of players play very successfully and win tons and tons of money from this grip. A lot of famous players. However, what we've got to understand is simply that it's going to change the hand action that we use throughout the swing in order for us to be successful. Now, there are very few currently players that I can think of that play with a weak grip. It's the same grip mold, but now I'm going to turn the forearm this way more. Rotate it. That gives me a 12 o'clock thumb, like this. My right hand will go a little bit more over the top. So I've got a 12 o'clock left thumb and a crease or a V in the right hand that points more up to my chin. This again will force us to have to change the hand action profile that we use in order to be successful. It can be very successful. Ben Hogan used this to become one of the greatest golfers of all time. He used this because he was working his way out of hooking the ball out of control too often, and this was one of the defenses he used, a weaker grip, in order to better control the face. Now, the three popular styles of gripping the club as far as interweaving the pinky, you've got a 10-finger grip, which is not a baseball grip. Remember, a baseball grip, the thumbs hang off more off the side of the grip like this. This is not a baseball grip, it's a 10-finger grip and has been used very successfully. It's just much rarer, but it can be very viable. It doesn't change a whole lot. In fact, I think someday we might show that this might be the best grip we can possibly use and just hasn't been in fashion. The other ideas that are popular are the overlapping pinky like this, which I would prefer. And then there's the interlocking pinky, which I think becomes a lot harder to do when you've got an issue not being able to reach your palm with your overlapping fingers, because I think this starts to erode. If you have short fingers already, it starts to make this issue even worse. So I would stay away from that unless you've already been doing it, you're highly successful. Unfortunately, I see this kind of being the automatic default for a lot of bad golfers who first learn that they've got to do something with their pinky, and this is no good, which it isn't. It's just fine. Any of these three grip styles will work. There's not a ton of modification that occurs in the hand action as a result of any of these grips. They're simply fairly interchangeable and don't really affect the golf swing all that much. All right, let's talk about some fundamental ways that the wrist joint can move and cause the hand to move. And coming back to this section often is really going to help you understand if you ever need a trouble swing, figure out why you might be hitting the ball a certain way or hitting it poorly. Come back to this section and review it again. Remember that we need to have a starting point in order for us to be able to be accurate with each other. For example, if I told you a vague term like over the top or early extension or steep, you could probably get a different definition of each of those three terms, 100 different definitions of that from 100 different teachers. So this is not precise enough language. And likewise, if I asked you to plan a trip to New York, you need a starting point. Otherwise, we're all going to take a different route or have a different understanding of how to get there. So the starting point is anatomical position, which just looks like this. This is anatomical position. This is your base that you'd start from when you start describing the action of any joint. In this case, we're going to be describing the wrists. Now, the wrist can move generally in 6 different ways. We can move this way, which we would call flexion. Now, it's kind of an archaic term, but some people will call this palmar flexion. It's a term more specific to the wrist because the palm is only in the wrist. You don't really have a palm in your foot. So palmar flexion would be specific to the wrist. Then you've got extension, or pinning the wrist back this way, sometimes known or used to be known as dorsiflexion. All right, now from the anatomical, you can also cause the wrist to separate away from the center of the body out to the side like this on the thumb side. This would be called abduction, and in some circles it might be known as radial flexion. Then you've got the opposite here. So let's look at, there's radial flexion on this plane. And then we'd have adduction with a D, AD, on the pinky side back in towards the center. That would look like this. Okay, just like that. Also known as ulnar deviation, if you wanted to describe perhaps in more archaic terms. Then we have our last two. We have from the anatomical again, you've got, if I were to rotate the forearm, this would be called pronation. Then we've got the opposite. If I was in this position, went back to the anatomical position, I'd have supination. Now, let's look at some real-world examples of how the wrists are used. Some notable ones that you've probably studied. If I were to flex my wrist this way, at the top of my swing, you could say that I had my left wrist bowed. Bowed is often the word that we'd use. Dustin Johnson is very bowed at the top of his swing with his left wrist. We'd simply call this in a flexed position. Coming down into the swing, notable golfers like Ben Hogan, and I know my mentor Mike Austin, and also in modern day, somebody like a Colin Morikawa, a Victor Hovland. Coming down into the slot, all of these players have their wrist in flexion, left wrist in flexion, as they come down like this. Now, a real world example of, let's say, radial flexion, or we'd say abduction, if you were to get the club back to here, you could radial flex and cause the club to cock at the wrist. So cocking the wrist on the backswing is often the result of a radial flexion at the left wrist. Now, generally a good model, if we were to combine these wrist and forearm actions to construct a good on-plane, powerful backswing, you could say, if I was to combine a 90-degree pronation, and notice, I'm going to be turning the entire arm. So I'm going to be recruiting, in this example, kind of supportive joints of the internal and external rotator cuff, and the flexing and extending of the elbows will help support or back up what we're doing with our hands. So you can construct a pretty solid backswing move with 3 anatomical moves. This really breaks it down and makes it very simple. I can take from a golf neutral position, let's say, which would look like this. I could do a 90-degree pronation. Go ahead and do this with me. And look, I'm going to allow the upper arm to rotate with it. So notice I'm going from bicep facing you to bicep pointing this way. So my whole arm at the shoulder is rotated. That's pronation. Now, that will also put my right wrist into extension. Here's extension from the golf anatomical starting position. There's extension. Okay, so the two of those will form this. We start to wind that back using other joints, and then we start to radial flex. We can start creating a doggone good, powerful, on-plane backswing just from those 3 wrist actions at either wrist. Now let's look at an example where these wrist motions have been often used incorrectly. Ben Hogan and many of his disciples still continue to use the wrong terminology describing Hogan as he comes into the ball with his bowed wrist this way. They call this supination. This is not supination. Remember, supination is this move. That is not what Hogan's delaying here. He is delaying extension of the left wrist by slightly delaying that in this flex position as he comes into the ball. Looks like this, and he's just delaying the wrist going into, and the freedom with which he's going into extension of the left wrist. So that is something that's been misused a lot over the years. All right, so when you understand the 6 basic anatomical movements of the wrist, you can build your castle on top of that. No matter what style of swing, no matter what style of grip that you use, there is a hand action modification that you can make in order to make yourself the most successful. And this is why so many styles of swing and golfers, tall and short and thin and fat, have made it into the Hall of Fame, because they matched up the style of hand action to an upright swing, a flat swing, an outside-in swing, an inside-out swing, all kinds of different takeaways, all kinds of different grips, so many permutations, and yet they were successful at the highest level because they understood the hand motions that were required to balance out whatever they had going on in the rest of their swing and make their swing repeatable. All right, now let's take a look at how each of those 6 wrist actions, if we isolated them as we stick the club down behind the ball, let's take a look in isolation of what each of those 6 actions would do. For example, if I was to go into flexion, it would look something like this. That alone would draw back the club on the arc beautifully, but it would have the club face somewhat closed relative to the arc. Looking at it from this direction, no motion other than a flexion at the wrist. Now see how the club is a little bit closed going back. Conversely, if we look at extension of the wrist, just holding everything and just extending only. Now again, I have advanced the club around the arc beautifully, and the club face is now, you could describe as open to the arc that it's traveling on. So the two together actually form a nice little working swing that would actually cause the club to be propelled around a beautiful arc with a very minimal amount of club face correction. In fact, you might be able to use that little baby swing to hit the ball really, really straight every time. Now we've got the next 2 actions. Remember this one, radial flexion or abduction. If I set the club down at the ball, that would make the club go up this way. And then pinky down, ulnar deviation, would cause it to return back to the ball again. So certainly this doesn't do us any good at the ball itself. We'd have to change to the side of our body over here to make the wrist cock and start to uncock. Would happen over here. But certainly if you did this here on your takeaway, you'd have to figure out how to drop it again at some point during the downswing. So we're not particularly interested in those 2 motions relative to isolated right on the golf ball. Now, the last 2 are interesting and will be very useful later. If I were to pronate the forearm, I would cause the club to twist in place around its own shaft. Now you notice, if I pronate, you can almost see the logo of the shaft on the side. And if I supinate, you can see the logo of the shaft on this side. So essentially, what I'm doing here by pronating and supinating is it provides a rapid opening and closing of the toe, a rapid rotation of club face. Now, whether this will come in handy or not to you is going to just depend on what style of swing you use and different factors, different forces that also come into play during your swing. But notice that essentially what that does is, as I do this and this, essentially what it does is rotate the shaft mostly just about itself, just like that. Now let's look at some of the ways that modifying the hand action can change the type of shot we would like to play. Now first, if we would like to play a lower shot, if we're playing into the wind or just want to lower our trajectory in general, we certainly could. There's the club in the right hand in extension. Now, if I were to delay the club from returning back to neutral where I started, if I start here at address and I do this in the backswing, if I were to delay returning what I took out, I could certainly cause the club to get de-lofted by having the handle lean forward more, just like that. So I might be able to hit a lower shot like that simply by delaying. Like this, I am forcing this hand to stay back, resisting because there is gravity and other forces that are wanting it to come out of that position, already acting on the club. So I am holding a contraction here. And this way, if I had to drive it low under a tree or into the wind, or maybe I'm playing on firmer fairways and I just want to hit it low, I could take advantage. Conversely, if I wanted to hit a high shot, I could modify the wrists by flapping right wrist into flexion earlier, left wrist into extension earlier, and I could pop it very high up into the air because I'm not leaning the shaft as forward. I might even have it even with the club head like this, and it's going to present more loft to the ball at the moment of the strike. So if I had to get it up over a tree, or I had to make the ball land quickly, I might use earlier and more free action of flexion and extension of the wrist. Now, if I want to intentionally curve a golf ball, or maybe I are already unintentionally curving the golf ball, I can use the rotation of the forearms, the pronation and the supination. Of course, opposite, you're going to have opposite action. So we'll have supination of the left, pronation of the right going together, and vice versa. If I were to pronate the right forearm early, I could easily get the ball to curve to the left or hook because the club face is shut at impact. And if I wanted the ball to slice, or maybe I hook the ball uncontrollably a lot, I can come into it instead of like this where I started. If I simply return to the ball with my forearms rotated like this, it forces the club to come through the ball more open, and I can get the ball to slice, in this case, off to the right. So you can control the club face quite a bit. This would be neutral where we started, but if I don't return here, which a lot of people just simply don't, if I return here, the club face will be open, and if I return here with my forearms rotated more at the moment of impact, then I'm possibly going to trend on hooking the ball. Now if I want to use the hands to hit for more power, I'm going to speed up this action here. Free action. Remember our three motions that we had to wind the club up. Here, here, and here. I can throw the club with the hands very free, just like this, and I can really make this club accelerate to a high rate of speed. So what am I doing there? I am returning, putting back what I borrowed. I'm going to turn the pinky down because I turned the thumb up on the backswing to cock the wrist. I'm also going to turn my forearm, assisted by my upper arm and the rotator cuff. And in the right hand, I'm going to go from extension, and I'm going to throw into slight flexion, something like this, just like that. Left wrist goes into extension, right wrist goes into slight flexion, and we have put back the forearm rotation that we took out in the backswing, just like that. Now, if you do this well, do this efficiently, you can really cause the club to track square to the arc as you do that move, just like that. And you can add a ton of accuracy to that power. Very important that you learn how to grip the club properly in the fingers, that you learn the actions here, and that you learn how to throw this thing. So if you took a simple alignment stick, you can learn how to throw the club throughout these joint motions, because it'll swoosh. The louder the swoosh, the faster the thing is traveling. So you want to learn to really swat with the wrists. If your grip is the correct form, and you're using the correct actions here. And now what I'm going to do is push down with a bigger burst of energy. I'm trying to make my force that I apply to the grip reach a very high peak or crescendo. Most of this function is not from strength or size, male or female, but instead supple quickness. This is why the grip pressure and the form of the grip will give you such a huge advantage, so that you can throw the club around the circle like Mike Austin prescribed. Throw the club head around the circle. That's what he said was playing golf. Throw it around the circle with the hand. All right, let's look at some more real world modifications of what we'll have to do differently with our hand action, or what we might call the release. The whole package of it might be called the release, but the hand actions will have to change with each of these conditions. Let's start with a strong grip. We talked about this earlier. If we had a 2 o'clock thumb and our right hand was underneath more like this would be a classic strong grip. We can use this to be successful. In fact, this grip has been highly successful over the years. A lot of players have won a ton of money, shooting very low scores, very good golfers with a strong grip. However, what you'll have to do to adjust to a strong grip biases you towards hooking the ball. And yet, what do you see on TV with all the golfers almost who play a strong grip? They all fade the ball. What are they doing differently? Well, their hands started here, and their strong grip put their hands here at address. All they're going to do is limit how much supination and pronation they're going to do coming back into the ball. They need to return exactly to where their hands were set. And this means the feeling of the right hand staying under as it flaps through. Not going over the top. The forearm cannot pronate over the top with this grip. It'll stay under more with the fleshy part of the arm facing upwards like this. And you can keep the club releasing square around the arc. Very viable style. Now, a weaker grip, you would have to do the opposite. So there's our weak grip again. 12 o'clock thumb, V up to the chin. This is a slice or fade open face biased grip. So if you didn't know any better at how to modify your hand action, this is one of the ways that you can fix your slice, if you have one, is by turning your hands over to the right more, or you can simply introduce more forearm rotation to get the club to square back up again. So I would need to more pronation of this forearm, and I can get this ball hooking even though I'm using a more of a slice biased grip. Now, if I was playing an inside to out path style, something more like this, playing inside to out, I'm certainly going to need more pronation of the right forearm early, more supination of the left forearm early before the ball is struck. Otherwise, that club is going to come through with the face open as well relative to the target. And I'm simply going to hit a push. So if I'm going to play this thing inside to out and draw it from the inside, I'm going to have to use more forearm rotation in order to get the club face to square up to where it needs to be to bring the curve back to center. Conversely, if I was purposely trying to slice the ball a little bit because, let's say I'm playing an outside to in pattern, and there's a lot of guys successful on tour at all times, any decade, current golfers, Brooks Koepka, Dustin Johnson, Victor Hovland are all great examples of players that win millions of dollars every year swinging outside to in. So don't think because you use an outside to in pattern that you are doomed to hit an out of control slice. They fade the ball because they know what hand action and how to modify their hand action in order to get that club face where it needs to be. So if I'm going to play outside to in, I need to slightly under rotate the forearms in this position as I go through the ball. And then I can certainly play successfully from outside to in. There's a beautiful fade right down the middle because I played outside in and I slightly modified at the moment of impact the position of my forearms this way. There's for a fade, and here's more for a draw if you're going to try to curve the ball intentionally and play your natural path. Now this next part is going to start to seem a little bit more complex, and it is. It's been a lot of mystery over the last 10 years or so that's been kind of unraveled one strand at a time. Now that technology is able to analyze the motion of the club in 3 dimensions and inversely go back and calculate what forces must have been used on the grip in order for the club to move through space in that particular manner in that much time. Because time would also suggest speed or acceleration as well. And so, the handle path becomes paramount to a very good golfer. This is where you start hitting the ball long, start to get better, and you really want to start performing. You really start to have to pay attention to this end of the journey and how it controls this end of the journey. How your handle moves through space will have a great deal of influence on what hand action, what combination of wrist joint movements that you're going to use to be successful. So for example, if the handle of your club moves outwards more, this way, and perhaps you get the wrists turned down a little bit, again, you're going to have to do that a little bit. That's that ulnar deviation again is going to have to occur in order to keep hitting the ball this way. If your handle is traveling in to out a little bit too much. Remember that the head responds to the handle quite a bit. So here, the head wants to trail behind the handle. It's seeking to fall in line, always. This end of the stick is always seeking to fall in line with this end of the stick. It's very complex because then you add in the force that you're also actively applying to the grip, and that gets the head and the shaft to respond. So it's a big, kind of a moving picture. Many permutations. When we go back to this example, you would certainly need a ton of pronation, supination this way, because the club face is going to tend to come in open, and the path will tend to come in to out. Furthermore, it will be very difficult to muscle it, the head of the club, around when the handle is going this way, because you will need to overcome the forces acting negatively. The club is trying to fall in line with the direction of the handle. That puts you here. Some people would call this stuck. And you're going to have to, of course, modify the style of hand action if you are a little bit stuck that way. Unless you're trying to play on tour, unless you're trying to win the US Amateur, play Division I golf. If you're just a casual golfer, you just have to modify the hand action and make sure, if you play this way, that you better be turning that toe over like this so that you can square the face and not leave that ball high and out to the right. Again, you're modifying the action, the basic 6 actions that we described earlier. You're simply modifying those in order to match up to the hand path that you typically have. Now, if you really want to get good, you've got to probably correct what this end of the stick is doing, but this is generally going to be controlled by the actions of the body, of the big part of the body that swings the arms around you, and so, to somewhat extent, the swing of the arms, but this is a different video, of course. If your hand path is working on a beautiful arc this way, and it's curving inwards and around and back up and to the left again, it's like you're pushing a tree this way. It only takes a little bit of a force to get it rotating, as opposed to if it's going this way, you're working against gravity. So if this end of the stick is turning the corner like this, it's causing just any small amount of force. Again, that right wrist, in our standard model, our right wrist was simply an extension, and we're just flexing the elbow from there. Here, we can get a lot of assistance in returning from extension back into our golf anatomically neutral here, where we started, and then some from the momentum, taking the wrist into slight flexion on the follow through. This will be assisted greatly, almost like having someone push you on the swings when you're a child, if this hand path is curving through space, something like this. Now it's like you're getting a boost. Now in this case, since you are getting this club head to respond this way so beautifully, You're not going to match this up with a lot of shaft twist because you already have plenty of squaring force to bring it back. There's a square club face, as opposed to in the first example, my club was this way. There's an open club face. How am I going to fix this? I'm going to add some pronation and supination, that emergency parachute. This will keep me from going way off to the right. But if I'm coming into the ball this way, all of a sudden my hand action will be modified. What you might call the release, the hand path and the hand action together might be defined as the release of the club head. This way, I've got enough squaring force already in the system because my hand path is working on an arc around me properly. So if I have enough squaring force already, I don't need to add any more by turning the forearms at all. But instead, I'll flap through more neutrally. You could think of this athletically as if you were playing pickleball or tennis, or the best example is racquetball. In racquetball, there is zero advantage, zero trick or advantage to playing a backspin shot or a topspin shot like there is in tennis or pickleball. In racquetball, the wall will take away all of that spin anyway. So in racquetball, you would hit what would be called a flat forehand. Handball would be another good one. You're just throwing the racket through, keeping the racket straight up and down like this. So the ball has neither backspin or topspin. This is a very analogous motion to the wrist action I will be making. I will be flapping, straightening the elbow, and flapping the wrist as though I'm going to slap someone, or as if I'm going to hit a forehand flat in tennis or racquetball. Especially racquetball, because in tennis, you don't really flap your wrist. So racquetball or pickleball is a better example. But I will be flapping the wrist around the corner this way. And so you'll see the club face, instead of coming out looking this way in the first example, kind of twisted down to the ground, it'll come out more this way, club face pointing back at the camera. And this simply just means, like this logo on top of the shaft and this American flag, I've simply taken this through and I've kept label up, label up, label up, all the way from here, all the way to here. Makes it very simple to advance the club by throwing it or flapping it this way, accelerating it with supple quickness, a high peak force or burst of energy that you supply way back here. You initiate. It peaks here, relaxes through here. That is the hand action of a lot of pros nowadays who make their hand path curl around the corner. Your hand path is going to greatly modify what you will have to do with your hand action in order to be successful. You will have to match them up, as you can see. Also, it's good to understand all these hand actions so that you can control the flight of your ball if it's going wrong. So if you are hooking the ball, you'll probably need less of this. If you're slicing, you might need to feel more of this, and certainly more of this. You've got to throw the club head past the hands and possibly turn the forearms over as well. Apply those two forces and you can often get yourself out of any slice. Conversely, any hook probably means the club face is too closed, especially to the path that it's traveling on. So you'll probably want to use less turning of the shaft, feel more like a drop shot or a backspin tennis or racquetball swing with the forearm under and the pinky leading. It might be a feel. Again, this is taking away some of the extra pronation you might be using to hook the ball and flapping free, almost like you're throwing a frisbee, cradling it forehand and flinging a frisbee, just like that. And this way, it can help you reduce some of that unwanted hook spin. All right, so if we have all the forces matching up properly with my hand path, my body, my arms are more or less creating the path of the handle, and I am trying to match up my hand actions and accentuate the speed with the quick whipping action we've described, we can hit the ball hopefully long and straight. And that's a nice straight one. Good distance for the effort, matching up all the right hand forces with the right handle path, understanding what the wrist can do, understanding the different types of grips and the way we're going to hold the club. These are all basics that we should understand. You can use this as a guide to come back and troubleshoot anytime you're having any difficulty in where your ball is going. You can use this for a lot of different things. If you're hitting the ball the wrong shape or the wrong height, you can come back and learn, again, review what you need to do with the wrists in order to help correct that issue. So I'd love to hear your feedback on kind of this in-depth guide on hand action, as of course leave any questions that you might have down there as well. I'm Steve, and of course, if I don't see you in the next video, I hope I see you longer and straighter down the fairway. Everybody take good care.